like.
Hey guys, and we're back with Real Talk with Real People. Today I'm joined with Brandy, Lee, and Kim, and we're going to talk to you guys today about scare tactics. So Lee, what are scare tactics?
So scare tactics are graphic stories or images. Excuse me. It could also be a family who has been through a trauma that shares it. And they also say it can be mock DUI scenes, the crashes, or like what they use for the prom crashes.
Are they effective?
That's debatable.
That's debatable, right? It's very controversial. Because I feel like you should know different things that go on. You know, like what's a bunch of numbers without like something to attach those numbers to, right? Does that make any sense?
I'm sure.
I think you have to make it real, and I think that's where you're going with that statement, is that if we just say, 7% of people who do X will die.
Right.
Okay, well that's just a statistic, that doesn't mean anything. But when you show a mock crash, or you show exactly how that happens and what it looks like, death is sort of this ethereal concept that you can't really pinpoint.
Right.
But if you see a really ugly, horrifying death, that sticks in your mind. The point is, with scare tactics, though, the concern is that it can go too far. Well, now you've traumatized somebody.
Right.
Or what was your goal in delivering that? Was your goal to scare them straight, or was it to traumatize them for the rest of their lives? Some of us grew up with this is your brain on drugs, and it was the egg in the skillet. Personally, I was never traumatized by that, but I remembered that, I didn't want to fry my brain. And so, we didn't do that, and we didn't engage in those things. Those sort of images are not appropriate anymore. And there are a lot of us that question that. I mean, we accept that guidance, but it's a questionable topic, and I think it really depends on what your goal is.
See, I think too. I remember that ad growing up, but I remember it for different because I was thinking to myself I need to remember this because this is going to make a good joke about something someday. So that's why I remembered it. I don't know if it really affected me the way that they thought it would, but for me, I was like, I'm gonna laugh about this later, or I'm gonna joke about this, or I'm gonna have it in my arsenal and stuff. But I still remember it, so in a way, it was kind of effective, right? What methods are they pushing for? What would they rather use if it's not using scare tactics?
Well, the big push right now is to just present the facts. And that is partially where my argument for scare tactics come in, because what is the difference between a scare tactic and a fact when the fact is this could potentially happen to you if you choose this behavior? I get that it maybe is traumatizing, if that's the word we want to use. I remember plenty of scare tactics. We're still seeing them with the smoking commercials. In my opinion, those things are working, right? So smoking has decreased tremendously.
Right.
However, I realize there are a lot of other things playing into that. They push education, information, policy changes in advertisement, things like that. I think they're all an important part of it, but I don't think scare tactics should come out of it, because I think they play an important role too. Like you said, it meant something to you, or you remembered it.
Right.
I remembered it as well. I didn't heed to it. However, as a fear-free teenager, I don't know that anything that we do, all the education you give a teen may not work. All the prevention efforts you teach a teen who's, already exhibiting risky behavior or just has no fear, they may not adhere to any of those things.
Well, even the numbers probably wouldn't scare them.
Right.
If a graphic image doesn't scare them, then why would the numbers scare them? And I think the thing is, why would we take tools out of our tool shed, right? Because I feel like it can be used well. I think the Truth Campaign did amazing for that when it came to smoking. I remember their commercials where they had people laying out on the streets in front of Philip Morris and stuff, and that was powerful. That was good too, but at the same time, it was truth, right? Because we knew the numbers, and people were dying of cigarettes, and they just gave it a picture, and it was able to work. What are your guys' thoughts on those mock DUI crashes?
Well, I know from my personal perspective, when I was in high school, they done the prom. You went out to the football field and they brought in 2 wrecked cars and placed them. And then we had students that dressed up in the fake blood and stuff, and they would put them in these scenes. Now, I don't know if they still do that in high
They do.
schools. Do they?
They do.
To me, seeing that and then being with your friends, because those are obviously the people you're going to be out with if you're going to party or do something like that. It stuck with me because in the back of my head, anytime we were at a party or something like that, I would think back to, is driving home worth it if we were drinking, you know? And I was very fortunate to have a mother that I could pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm in a sticky situation, can you come pick me up? And they were very understanding.
I think some of the concerns that I've heard voiced that have to do with that situation in particular is that it causes, especially children and adolescents, to not trust people, to not trust what we're telling them, because once they've gained some experience, you know, some life experience, they've been out there and they've partaken in some of these things, then they say, oh, that's not really going to happen. It didn't happen to me. I know somebody who does it and it didn't happen to them. They're still fine. However, the potential is still there. And so we don't want them to distrust us. So maybe we just need to, you know, prepare them as opposed to scare them with the information. Hey, maybe it didn't happen this time. Maybe it didn't happen the 5th time, but it could potentially happen to you or a loved one or to anybody that you know. The potential is there regardless.
Does that work just number-wise? Or do you have to have that image in your head sometimes?
I think it depends on your audience. So I think, you know, you mentioned that it's like tools in a tool shed. I think that's the perfect analogy, because it depends on your audience how you deliver something. And I mean, whatever your message is, you should have multiple ways to deliver that message. If your audience is a group of teenagers who are high risk, who've tried everything, who are very much, you know, consequences be damned kind of individuals, that's not going to work for them.
Right.
But numbers aren't going to work for them either. You've got to find
Right.
something else that's going to work for that audience. The kids who that will work for and the graphic image does affect, then use it. I mean, that's more appropriate. If you have individuals who come from a very high background of trauma, you don't use graphic images.
Right.
That's not going to work. But you keep it in your tool shed at the same time. You know, and just like Brady said, there are some kids, it doesn't matter what you try. It just won't make an impact. But how do you know that?
Right.
How do you know that unless you've tried everything? And it could be, what is it for like being able to remember something, you have to hear it like 80 times or something. It could be that a kid has gone out and tried this risky behavior and they've seen the Philip Morris ad, and they've seen this ad, and they've seen this ad, and it doesn't stick with them. But maybe the 20th time or the 80th time they see an ad and the person looks like their sister. Then it hits them. Then
Right.
they understand that. Then that reality hits home, and now you have an effective campaign.
What about like recovery stories or people in recovery doing stories? Are those effective? Because I feel like those are really effective. Like you should know the dangers and stuff that are awaiting that are out there if you don't, you know, pay attention to those risks.
I think so. Definitely in a recovery-based program, if you're in it, you kind of know what people have been through, so that helps. If you have somebody that may stimulate a trauma in them, maybe you can remove them from hearing that story from somebody. But in my experience, a lot of my recovery guys, talking to them, they do remember these stories of people coming in, and they see where they've come from, homeless and living on the streets, and now these people have jobs and they've got their license back in cars and stuff, and it's hopeful for them because they can see a place from their despair of, I can get there. If they can do it and they were here in my position, I've just got to put forth the effort and I can get there.
I guess what's really kind of scary to me, kind of what I guess I'm thinking is numbers aren't relatable. They're factual, and we really want them. You know, there's a big push, you know, for the science of everything, and I agree with that. But I think sometimes the numbers take away the human part of it all, because we're not just numbers. We are people, and you know, being afraid of things and having that sense of risk, I don't think is necessarily wrong. And you can't really get that from a number that says 7% of you will, you know, and you're like, oh, that's 93% chance that I'm not gonna have to worry about that, because there's no human element to numbers.
Well, I don't know about y'all, but I'm a visual learner. If you throw numbers at me, I ain't gonna remember none of that. But if I see something and it's something that sticks with me, it sticks.
Well, and just to mention something about what Lee was talking about, she was saying using people perhaps that are in recovery or families that have been impacted by situations like that.
Mhm.
For folks who are in recovery, they say that yes, that is effective.
Mhm.
But what folks like the Department of Health and Human Resources and prevention, intervention specialists and stuff like that say that when we're talking about adolescents, youth and adolescents, that that's not as effective.
Yeah.
That it comes off better coming from a parent, someone they look up to, a community leader, a faith-based leader, something like that. So again, knowing your audience, you need to know who it is that you're talking to.
Mhm.
But I have a question for you, Nick.
Sure.
So, and I hope that this doesn't get too controversial, but just to give an example of scare tactics working. Right now, in our world, what are we experiencing?
We got that quarantine going on, the big pandemic.
And is it working when they're telling people it's going to spread, you're going to give it to other people, people could get sick, people could die, you need to stay home, you need to do this? Are people listening?
Yeah, because I mean, they see those scary visuals on the news. They see the hospitals overran. They see things that are going on. So
Just tell me to stop. It's the truth, though. You don't want to talk about it?
So, no, I'm gonna jump on.
I'm over here.
Okay.
I'm over here shaking my head like, no,
So
I don't believe
CBS,
that.
just now we're gonna get really controversial, but CBS just released confirmation that when they were talking about how overcrowded the hospitals were in New York City, that they actually used footage from Italian hospitals to prove their point.
Yeah.
Why would they do that unless they were aiming for the scare tactic and aiming for the visual?
right.
You know, if you want somebody to stop doing something, you don't show them the numbers in recovery.
Right.
Because that's hope.
That's right.
Hope and fear do not go together. You show them the death. You show them all these other pieces. This goes back to you talking about having people in recovery come and talk to adolescents. It can go both ways. It's a very slippery slope because kids see that as, well, you lived, why won't I? I mean, it might be bad for a while, but I'll be fine.
They
No.
filter things differently in their
They
brain.
do,
They filter
absolutely.
differently.
And we, even though we were adolescents at one time, we are not adolescents today. We do not filter things the same way. That is one of the hardest things about prevention is you have adults teaching kids how to prevent their behaviors. Not teaching them topics and, English and math, and that's different. But you're talking about their behavior and you're coming in and saying, I get it, I used to be like you. No, you didn't. Your experience is not the same as anybody else's, much less in adolescence. And so you're already up against a roadblock. Parents have a little bit of a different perspective and kids look at them differently. But where does that scare tactic come in?
I mean,
You're acting.
And unfortunately, I feel like teenagers are high-risk seekers.
Absolutely.
So if it's
That's your age of
sounds-
experimentation.
Yeah. So,
that is what's up. I feel like I know my parents use scare tactics on me. Like if I see you do that, I will murder you. And I was like, well, not doing that. I want to live.
But that's
So-
where this is why kids require discipline. And I mean little kids all the way up. If you do not provide discipline, I'm not saying beat your children. I'm saying put boundaries and lines. If you do not put boundaries and lines, people will continue to push until they find it. Boundaries keep you safe. They help you feel secure in your environment. The same thing goes with prevention. If you don't know where those lines are, if you don't know where that line of death or harm or whatever is, then you're going to keep experimenting and pushing until you find it. Now, it may be somebody telling you that's effective, or it may be you overdosing, having to be brought back with Narcan and realizing, you know what, I almost just died. That's my line. Everybody's line looks a little different, and everybody feels their line differently and finds their line differently. I was the same kid. I was the kid you just had to say, I'm disappointed in you, and my life was over.
Not me.
Brandy was not that kid.
I was like, I don't believe you. Let me see for myself.
Yep.
And I pushed the envelope on every chance I had.
And
And
you found
it
your
wouldn't
enemy.
matter. Yeah. And it wouldn't matter. Like I read something that said if scare tactics worked, there would be no more smoking, there would be no more drinking, there would be no more teen pregnancy.
No.
I'm gonna call bull on that.
Yep.
Because all the education, all the scare tactics, all the policy change, everything in the world meant nothing to me when I was doing what I was choosing to do, and I was fully aware of all those things. But I do think that they are all super important to have in your toolbox, to use, because if scare tactics save 10% of the people, that's 10% of the people we save. If education saves 20% of the people, that's 20% of the people we save. Whatever works, we need to work it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm glad you mentioned boundaries too, because our next Journey to Hope is actually going to be on boundaries too. So I think that works in really well. So if you guys want to tune into that one, you guys
I
will probably
definitely
really
tune
enjoy
into
that.
one.
But I was thinking about this too, because I know for me, like if I was like searching the internet and stuff, like I would see like those websites, Faces of Meth, all those things, and that really scared me away, especially for meth, because I was like, not these pearly whites, you know. I was like, I wanted, you know, I didn't want that, and so there became like a big stigma on that drug, and I think, you know, in that, if you're stigmatizing drugs, I think it's great, but we can't stigmatize the user is the
Absolutely
problem.
not.
So you stigmatize the drug and not the user. And I think fear is healthy, and having a healthy bit of fear really does. That's what keeps me from jumping off the roof. I'm scared that I'll
Get
fall and
hurt.
get hurt.
And it's a balance, though,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're so scared of jumping off the roof that you can't leave your house, that's too far. If you are so scared of substances that you won't even take Tylenol when you need it, maybe that's too far. I mean, I think everything in life requires a balance, so I'm glad that you said healthy fear.
Yeah.
Because you can have too much hope and not enough fear, and everything's a balance. You gotta have that yin and yang right there.
Too much of anything is still too much.
It's still too much.
I think it's good. I think it was a good thought.
Yeah, I liked it.
Definitely. All right. Thank you guys for coming out too. If you guys have any questions, make sure you guys comment on our post and hit the like button. At the end of this video, there's also a crisis hotline number too. So if you guys are experiencing anything or your family member is, make sure you guys are calling that. You guys can also message us here as well. Thank you guys. You have a great day.
Thanks, guys.